You are listening to yet another Clarkesworld Magazine podcast. I'm your host and narrator, Kate Baker. Welcome to the fifth story for the month of December 2025, issue 231. It's the fifth story for the month of December, and as we close upon yet another year at Clarkesworld, I want to say thank you for your ongoing support. By being here, by listening, by joining another author in their telling of another world, of new characters, by purchasing a subscription, by going to patreon.com/Clarkesworld. You make this happen every single month for years and have given me one of the best jobs I've ever had. So thank you. Our story is titled Between Here and Everywhere and is by a Clarkesworld familiar, Robert Reed. Robert Reed is the author of nearly 300 published stories, plus more than a dozen novels. He is best known for his great ship stories, including Marrow and the Memory of Sky, and for the novella A Billion Eves, which won the Hugo Award in 2007. He lives in Lincoln, Nebraska with his wife and daughter. And like I said, bunch of stories here at Clarkesworld. If you want, you can go back to Pooh Bell, Conversations in the Dark, Nameless He, Bonobo, and Painwise. So, my dear listener, I hope that you can sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. 1. Relentless motion was his joyous affliction. Armed with his beautiful map, he would find an empty cap car and pick some random intersection. I want to be here, he declared. Except every car knew the terrain better than he ever could. Certain requests were met with polite but firm refusals. A local ordinance forbade entry, or runaway crime ruled that neighborhood or places close by. More embarrassing was the realization that certain intersections hadn't existed for 100,000 years, and in those cases, cap cars weren't shy about offering advice. What the traveler needed was a less ignorant map. Except the map happened to be a lovely antique, and ignorant humans didn't deserve better. When another destination was needed, this human often pointed at a location that he already knew. One bright recollection inside his murky, half-shattered brain, but even the familiar realm swallowed him up with the strangeness that ruled over the city of a trillion boulevards. The ignorant human had a roommate, traveling companion, and frequent lover. They shared a 3-room domicile near the government district. They shared the middle room, while each kept their own chamber for sleep and solitude. The roommate was a pan-ware, as it happened, a shapeshifter. Not the rarest of creatures, though it was impossible to gauge how many others walked the streets and flew across the black sky. Visiting his bedchamber, the creature always took human form, female and pretty. That was his rule. Inside the common room, she was free to be anyone, which was usually a familiar species, and they made love there, too. Only when he was especially lonely did the human ask to invade her privacy. Sometimes she said no, but with a yes, he opened the doorway to find a body built by an artist. Vibrant colors, mismatched limbs, and a face as lovely as it was singular. Indeed, something about the fluid features was familiar, almost reassuring. And afterward, as he found his way to sleep, the farthest edges of his life would whisper to him, making wild claims that he always forgot as soon as he woke again. Kingfisher, she said. The eyes came open. This happened to be his room, bright and familiar, yet in the same moment he was thoroughly lost. A human lady was sitting on his bed, smiling at his runaway confusion. Again, she said that word. His name. One blink of the eye and Kingfisher recovered his identity. This was his long-time home, and his panware lover was not only dressed in human form, but her clothes were suitable for public events. Sitting up. That was his first accomplishment, followed by a deep sigh and a second blink, which was when he realized that they were still navigating the middle of the arbitrary night. Something must have just happened, or something important was about to occur. You're going somewhere, he decided. With you, she said. Loyal clothes flowed up his legs, across his chest, beneath his rump. Kingfisher used to be an exceptionally bright human. He felt quite certain about that assessment. But even in this diminished state, he was adept at measuring postures and faces, passions and likelihoods. "We've been summoned," he assumed. "You have been." Only one authority could make this shapeshifter jump on command. The Master's office? The Master herself. A large portion of Kingfisher's life had been spent wandering across a wilderness of ice, stubbornly chasing after his lost lover. Complicated feelings were in play. Lust and a compelling need for vengeance eventually brought him here. Except this was the city of boundless disappointments, and despite a physical similarity, the local master wasn't the human he expected to find. Not at all. Likewise, the giant woman didn't recognize Kingfisher's face or his woeful stories. But she admitted to having colleagues in arms, 12 high-ranking humans, none of whom had been seen for a long while. Perhaps the lady in question was one of them. And then, despite having just met the poor wanderer, the master gave him a gift. Kingfisher was free to use her private emerald skimmer. Once he resumed his search for the missing lady, that is. Kingfisher remembered all of it. Not just meeting the master, but his arrival in the city of a quadrillion strangers, and how later, when traveling alone and exposed, the blessed Pan Ware came to his aid. That exceptional day felt closer than most of the subsequent days. "I'm ready," he announced. His present lover never quit watching him. That was always true, but her interest felt different this morning. Those temporary eyes were fixed on his eyes, unmentioned worry making the pretty face sharp and a little cold. They stood up together. Ruled by habit, Kingfisher collected his treasured map, folding it into a small, dense mass resting inside his deepest pocket. By and large, Pan Wares avoided personal names, but partly out of convenience and partly as a test, Kingfisher insisted on finding one word or phrase to be used as a name. Would this entity make that sacrifice for him? Yes, she did. But to diminish the gesture's importance, she gave him full responsibility, and after considerable thought, he had settled on calling her Quirk, because she was a gift delivered by a quirky fate. Kingfisher was ready, but his roommate first had to take him by the hand, her eyes growing huge. "What's wrong?" he asked. "If I knew, I would tell you," she said, taking the lead. The city that sleeps and shifts was waiting for them, the narrow boulevard filled with moving bodies and night odors, plus noises and ideas that no half-brained human could decipher. A journey of 50 meters made on foot put Kingfisher inside another strange realm. As always, there were species that he didn't recognize. Wings from a left-behind galaxy danced around the weak street lamps, cursing their foes with a vicious, untranslatable language. One whiff of lucid fog collapsed into a puddle and crawled between two cobblestones. Then a fat stick walking on thin stick legs decided to block their passage. Quirk shoved the beast aside and jumped onto the cap car platform. It was a short trip to the master's offices, but 3 empty cars passed them without slowing. On her orders, apparently. The 4th car was built for long journeys, and it settled down beside them. But its cabin was filled with passengers who didn't want this backwater place. The car had to insist that they disembark, using kind words and then threats of legal action. And once that war was won, the empty car said, "I don't know where I need to be. Tell me where I need to be." There were only a few addresses that Kingfisher knew by heart. Quirk offered one of them. Instead of jumping straight into the master's office, as assumed, they were about to fly across the city of mysterious commands, to the docklands, where a certain emerald skimmer slept inside its helium bath. The master's tired of waiting. That's what Kingfisher assumed. She wants me back on the trail of her missing associate. Quirk didn't tell him that he was right or wrong. Sitting beside him, she held one hand with human hands. But then she let go again and witnessed something quite odd, something rarely seen before. The Pan Ware dissolved her skeleton and absorbed her eyes, breathing one final time through a mouth that turned into gray scales. And the pill-like body grew cold, soft, dry sounds rising from within. From those places where she was brave enough to confront her fears. Two. Every building employed the same ancient tools, and every lasting structure was ruled by inspirations carried across the cosmos. Arches were beautiful. Spirals were beautiful. Strong lines deserved to be praised, and flat walls were more efficient than those that bent. Likewise, the worthy house had to stand on its own, or lean against willing neighbors, and if you wanted to remain dry, you demanded a roof to defend yourself against snow and rain. But for those blessed with fins and gills, it was smart to collect the easy water, and when neighbors strolled past your home, they saw you swimming behind fancy crystal windows or flat, strong diamond panes. The city's residents were much more diverse than the buildings, yet organic creatures had an inescapable logic. Water-soluble proteins and oxygen metabolisms further narrowed what was easy. Your body might be huge, but there were costs embedded in becoming a giant. Better to be small and cheap. Kingfisher, for instance. He had a respectable size, and he was as human as any could be in this realm. From the first day, it was obvious that your companion felt most at ease with the same-sized human strolling beside him. This happened 10 million days ago. Kingfisher wanted to explore the city on his own. He told you so and left straight away, but then you contrived a fresh body and followed after him. By midday, the two of you were hundreds of kilometers from home, sitting in the same public eatery. You were enjoying a bowl of salted broth. The human was 3 tables over, and the same as many times before, he proved himself to have the bolder appetite, sipping a local beverage that fizzed and boiled inside his pinched mouth, quickly eating away his flesh and teeth. Not what he expected, and he laughed. The proprietor, a nervous little beak-leak, hurried over to assure his guest that this soup was a true delight. But you must have patience, my friend. Patience. Sure enough, when Kingfisher swallowed the concoction, he tasted both the soup and his molten self, and he loved that unique sensation. But drink slowly, the beak-leak warned. Too fast, and your handsome face melts away. Kingfisher's mouth was still healing when a second human emerged from the crowd. At least, that's what he seemed to be. Male, not large, pale pink where the flesh showed, with white hair and bright white teeth and one very human smile. What a coincidence, finding one of his own species. That's what Kingfisher must have told himself. Armed with an innate confidence, the stranger approached. One quick nod and an offered hand preceded what sounded like a human voice. Jason. That's what Kingfisher heard, followed by, And who are you, my good sir? Kingfisher spat blood and offered his name. Jason sat across from his newest friend, and with a human wave of the hand, he commanded his own mug of flesh-eating delights. You saw and heard everything. That body was remarkable. Not just obviously human, but there were no apparent traces of genetic engineering or genetic wanderings. Several billion years crossed, yet this creature belonged to the lost Earth, which was nothing but ludicrous. Obviously, the creature was a panware, a shapeshifter like you, except your kind were required to warn one another about their presence, a courtesy that hadn't been delivered to you. And if this was a panware, then this was a cheater, a genuine hazard, an entity to be attacked at the first sign of trouble. You made yourself ready for a fight. But Kingfisher saw nothing beyond a happy new pal. Leaning across the table, he said, Tell me if I'm wrong, sir, but I think you have an interesting story. The pink face answered with a grin and a prolonged laugh. Then the drink arrived, and staring at the caustic fluid, the stranger said, Shapely? The galactic cluster. That's where my home world was. Exactly 1 Terran mass. A very Terran climate. With a yellow-white sun and 1 fine moon. My ancestors were furred beasts living in green trees. Then we came down from the trees and built a civilization that flew to the stars, and that's where we died. Don't ask me where we failed or why. I have no answers. There was a single fertilized egg purchased in an auction. I don't know by whom, and I can't recreate the kindness or the forgetfulness that placed my embryo on board an ark that flung itself in front of this wondrous galaxy ship of yours, but there had to have been a sequence of remarkable events, otherwise I wouldn't be drinking with you now. The alien took a mighty draught. It was Kingfisher's turn to speak. "I'm older than you," he began. "Thoroughly human, but my life story is a mystery to everyone. My personal intuition suggests that I was born before this galaxy ship was built, and I was on board when it was launched. Just like the egg, I have no details, no authenticated explanations. Vague recollections have me wandering the ship's ice when a small world crashed nearby. My survival was unlikely, my resurrection remarkable. Injuries and insults left my brain punctured and partly shattered, but what I can remember are moments like this. Two pleasant souls sharing the weather and their natures, and if I forget you, sir, it's only because I am an idiot." Three. Many days and quite a lot of work. That's what would come after the old skimmer was dragged out of hibernation. In other words, the future was undecided. This was the city of whim and caprice, and the master's plans might shift tomorrow. Likewise, there was ample time to demand explanations, to beg for directions and a goal. Kingfisher's first assumption was that he was being ordered to resume the old chase. No second assumption existed, certainly nothing worth the bother. But even if the master's orders weren't rescinded, this unwilling hunter could drag out his preparations while building a different scheme. If he wished, he could don a disguise and vanish into the city of secret lives, or more likely, after 10 or 20 days filled with good-natured labor, he would race out across the trackless ice. But once out of sight, he would be free to wander where he damned well pleased. Descending on the docklands, the cap car decided to hover, and that's when Quirk conjured a human face and bones. Kingfisher said nothing. She matched his silence. Then one long building opened its roof, revealing a room populated with bodies and noise. The car landed as far from both as possible. The human's companion immediately jumped down to the workshop floor. There she stood, waiting for Kingfisher apparently, but she didn't look back at him, not once. And then he was down, and then the two of them moved in the same direction, but not together, organisms with a shared destination. They were nothing more. Grand and ancient and very clean, that was the Emerald Skimmer. Saved from the helium and roused from the deepest possible sleep, the machine was presently surrounded by engineers furiously checking systems and guts, while a wetware maven stood apart from the others, arguing with an open node to the AI pilot. "Leave me alone," the pilot begged. "But you want to be informed," said the maven, a deed dreamer, as it happened. Blue-black fur stretched over a muscular circle, electrified tentacles touching and punching the node. "Truth is an affliction," the pilot declared. "For the weak, absolutely, but not for you." "Honesty is a narcotic. Get out of my brain, you bullying shit." Kingfisher stopped walking. Quirk remained beside him. She certainly had to feel his stare, but her own sober gaze was aimed straight ahead. The master's chief of staff appeared, a panwear like Quirk. Her appearance shifted from day to day, but the uniform and stiff bearing never changed. She was presently wearing a tall bipedal body covered with bright scales and bright feathers. An insect's complicated mouth was folded against the inhuman face. What sounded like a human voice rose from her chest. Stepping out of the skimmer's primary hatch, she called to Kingfisher by name, then added, "Recognize the honor and feel proud about your courage." "Why am I being brave?" he asked, again staring at Quirk. At last she looked at him. "I was told to bring you here, and that's all I know." Quirk was a gifted liar, but these words and the tone sounded false, and every part of her looked guilt-ridden. "This way," said the chief of staff. A courageous man might have resisted, but not this poor fellow. The order was obeyed, his lying roommate walking behind him. There were said to be 13 luxury skimmers in the original human fleet, equal in power and quality, but unique in the details. This particular vessel was full of tall orders and long, narrow hallways. The woman who once lived here favored the illusion of wood. Floors were covered with planks of tight-fitted boards, the exposed walls resembling the heartwood of a living oak tree. while every distant ceiling wore a white timber leaking spicy fragrances that shifted by the hour. Kingfisher had explored these hallways just once, yet he remembered everything. Except, that is, for the dozen soldiers and staff members milling about inside the gallery, or the master manning the otherwise empty bridge. Kingfisher stepped onto the bridge. Quirk followed. The visitors deserved a single glance. Then the giant woman returned to her vital work, watching over the bustling crews. "Thank you," she told one of her guests, or both of them. "You're welcome," Quirk responded. Nothing else was said, which didn't suit the idiot human. "You've taken back your ship," he said. A jungle of yellow and black and white hair hid the round face. The broad body wore layers of silken fabric tied at the waist with 3 golden ropes. One foot wore a sandal, but its partner had decided to be bare. The other sandal flipped on its back, looking rather lonely just now. Kingfisher glared at Quirk until she met his eyes, and with a fierceness that perhaps neither of them expected, she said, "You shouldn't have left us after the first 1,000,000 days. Back on the ice again, wandering with the fates." "Except the fates kept me here," he countered. She squared her newest shoulders. It was possible to believe, if only for a moment, that the two of them would strike each other with fists. Then the master declared, "Your duties are done." Speaking to one of them, only one. The creature in charge of everything turned her head. "Go on now. Go," she demanded. Quirk moved her feet, but the rest of her held its ground. "No, I want you to leave us," the master said. "Your little boy and I will succeed without you." "Oh, there's no success to be had." The little boy reached for his companion. She evaded the motion, but not his expression. Pain, regret, confusion on top of confusion. That's what Kingfisher hit her with. His closest friend was also his keeper, and god damn, he deserved to feel appalled. Quirk pushed 2 fingertips against the human forehead. Then, with a dry, defeated voice, she confessed, "This is my home. I've never left the city, not even with my imagination." "Leave me," Kingfisher insisted. "I want you gone." The panware grew long legs, turned and ran through the doorway. The little boy was left crying and not crying. That's what the rage did for him. Without an invitation, he stood beside the master, and after a long pause, he asked, "Why? Why?" Then he looked at her. The woman was also weeping, and in the most spectacular fashion. One obvious answer offered its aid. "You just lost your station," he guessed. "A purge, a coup. Someone else is going to steer the city that can't find its way." She said, No, and yes." Joyous tears. On second thought, that's what Kingfisher was seeing. "My chief of staff takes the helm," the former master explained. "A suitable human, harum-scarum, becomes her second in command. And that's how all of our cities have been managed from the beginning." "All right, but what am I doing here?" Triggering one more remarkable event, an immense hand was set on his shoulder, patting him in a rough but fond manner. "Oh, Kingfisher," she said. "That is not your original name." "I'm not surprised," he agreed. "Kingfishers were small predatory birds on the old Earth." "And they still are, I hope." "Residing in a taxonomic group called Halcyon." "Halcyon," he repeated. "A bird of legend, a mythical soul who could flatten the waves and calm the wild seas." And she patted him twice more before taking back her hand. "I need a bird like you on this voyage. That's why you're here." "And where are we going?" She pointed ahead and to the left, just slightly. "What's there?" he asked. "Everywhere. That's where we're headed," she said. Nothing more. Out on the work floor, the engineers were finishing their duties, and either satisfied or unsatisfied with her pupil, the Maven closed down the node before gliding away. The new master was standing in the distance, bulging compound eyes, watching an entire wall being pulled out of the way, open black skies and frigid, even blacker waters revealed. The Emerald skimmer was going to launch soon. Very soon. But before the adventure could begin the storm-killing bird demanded to know where his new quarters were. It didn't take long to find the correct door, locked and willing to recognize only one key. Kingfisher's left hand caused the door to open. The room was small, one bed set against the farthest wall, and that's where Quirk lay, wearing no clothes or face, her shriveled body covered with spider limbs tied into complicated, tight, and very painful knots. Setting his prized map on the only table, the human ordered his clothes to drop away. Then he lay beside her, holding tight until she relaxed, and he was asleep, and somewhere in the midst of that fitful rest, the emerald skimmer fled the city of endless treachery. 4. The poor human had no choice but to plow through life with a damaged, incomplete mind, a terrible burden for some. But in certain moods, particularly when he was especially happy, Kingfisher argued that the broken brain gave him his open, inquisitive nature, a state nobody else could match. And maybe this wasn't a coincidence. Maybe his brain broke in the best ways. Not a very plausible speculation, no, but it was offered with joyful confidence, and then you touched him in some gentle fashion, reminding him that you appreciated quite a lot about him. But more than anything, what you envied was his talent, a full-bore genius, for building joy from the most mundane ingredients. I wish I could be more like you, you declared. One very useful lie. Souls like yours, Panwares and a few odd others, recognized happiness as a weakness, an animal emotion rising from ignorance. Melancholy and paranoia, those were the walls of the worthy mind. That was truth that had carried you for your entire life. Smiles were easy to conjure. You could always tell fine jokes and laugh better than anyone else in any room. But beneath the pliable skin there was sadness, a reasonable, unbound grief. After all, you were a fleck of life trapped aboard a galaxy ship wandering aimlessly across an empty sky. This little existence of yours, spent in a metropolis too ancient to claim any trustworthy history. Fables heaped upon fables, legends of wars and data purges. Meanwhile, the surrounding universe grew thinner by the moment and colder. And worst of all, one especially grim school of thought claimed that this creation and all of the adjacent universes were ridiculously frail. One mistake made in the wrong moment and nothing would remain, not even the memory of existence. History and legend both claim that the Panwares deserved more than a fair share of power, but you were not a member of the elites, not among your sorrowful kind, or in any other ranks either. Then one lost and broken human arrived in the city, and a rather important Panware took note. You just happened to be nearby. It was his suggestion that led you to the traveling human. You were on a reconnaissance mission, nothing more. You found Kingfisher hard asleep on the river liner, unaware of approaching thieves. Images and field analyses. That's what you gathered, sending the data to the important Panware. Then you waited. Higher echelons discussed this matter. A few hard searches were carried out inside the degraded libraries, but nothing remained beyond a string of unanswerable questions. This entity? Authentically human and old. Some saw the chance that he was once quite special. Except nobody could say why he ever mattered, and the poor boy was thoroughly useless now. Kingfisher. Yes. That name was tied to a fellow even more ignorant about his past than this city was, and you sat beside him, waiting until the important Panware spoke to you one last time. He is yours, the voice promised. Play whatever game you want. With his soul, with his bones, or just fly away. The artisan's shop was both well regarded and difficult to find, two sides to a rather famous coin. One new friend told Kingfisher of the shop's existence, but that creature knew it only from wild stories. You were part of the conversation, and turning to you, your companion asked for help. And you lied to him. For no reason beyond habit, you claimed to know nothing about the shop, but showing him a fine smile, you promised to research the matter. More days came and other trips were taken. The topic went unmentioned. 1,000 days and 5,000 more, and suddenly it was night and your lover was beside you, no light inside your sanctuary room. Inside the ink, Kingfisher took a sudden, deep sad breath. This wasn't a sound that he typically made. Then came what could only be described as a whimper, and out of all possible responses, you decided to tell another lie. By the way, I just found the artisan's shop, you claimed. I can take you there tomorrow if you wish. The next breaths were quick and happy. Both of you slept quite well. Kingfisher woke early and led the way. The shop had been profitable since the Virgo cluster, making it older than you, a fact disclosed while riding the cap car. Just mentioning your past was unusual. Volunteering honest details was nearly unheard of. But there you were, holding his hands as the metropolis slid beneath you, and without any prompting whatsoever, you offered a date for your birth and a smattering of early memories about life on a street that didn't exist today. Except in your mind, that is. When Kingfisher concentrated, he fell into a soft smile. That smile said one word. Parents. Panwares have one parent, or 50, you explained. We're comatose pills set inside reaction chambers protected by laws, by security, plus some well-deserved public caution. Once we're grown up enough, we wake and the chamber dissolves. According to custom, Panwares mimic the first creature they meet. I met a denizen of the alleys. Suddenly there were two of us. One animal lost the fight and one of us survived. I survived. Unless I was the one who was devoured, of course, and wouldn't that be a funny twist? Kingfisher laughed. You joined in. The cap car set down at the end of what might be confused for a vacant alleyway. You took the lead, pretending to follow obscure instructions. But no, you knew how to find the filthy doorway that took most of your strength to open. That was one of the shop's finest rules. If two souls were present, they had to work together to pull the door open, wrestling with slick handles and screaming hinges. And after that came more dirt and more stubborn doorways. This is a nightmare, Kingfisher said. God, I love nightmares. The shop's ground floor was its top floor. Simple art objects and artifacts from the most famous civilizations were happy to be seen. A kilometer-long aisle was dedicated to models of the galaxy ship itself. The sculptures were wooden or metal, carved stone or carved light. Different materials, but always the same funnel shape, the round bow as broad as a small solar system, the hyperfiber shell narrowing down to a point of scorching light. This was the quasar-powered machine built by humans and Panwares, the crowning achievement of a galaxy united by its ambition to journey far and see all of the universe's wonders. Except the top floor was just a distraction. The real artwork, demanding and grand, filled the first basement, and the basement after that, and all of the uncounted cellars below. How deep does this go? He asked. I don't know, you said. Not a lie. You'd never gone deeper than you were right now. There was too much to see and do, touch and be touched by. The creative highlands of 1,000 galaxies stood around you, testing your aesthetics and your sanity. If not for the food emporiums and the little cots in back corners, the two of you might have collapsed from exhaustion, your desiccated bodies marked as curiosities and sold for a pittance. Kingfisher had financial resources, but not enough to purchase any basement item. The beloved map was waiting on the ground floor, and it wasn't even regarded as art. No, it was a pragmatic machine built with Virgo compression tricks. Kingfisher found it near the exit, and he began to play with it. The flat, black slab, revealing its myriad folds, the city rendered as beautiful colored lines and little navigational flags. The map was his gift to himself. Oh, so you don't have to help me all the time, he said. But I like helping you, you said. True words, in general. The two of you returned home again, life resuming as a sequence of journeys and little events with long reaches of peace. 1,000,000 days later, you and Kingfisher were sitting in the same cafe, but not together. You were sipping broth, and he said to a new friend, two pleasant souls sharing the weather and their natures, and if I forget you, sir, it's only because I'm an idiot. Then he came home to find you waiting for him. It was easy to be invited into his bed, and while he was sleeping, you slipped away, carrying his cherished map in human hands. The rest of the night was spent opening one infinite page after another, fingers and eyes following those gorgeous lines. When Kingfisher woke, he found the map where he had left it. I wish I could be more like you. Words that you continue to offer, still a lie, but not the same lie. Because more and more, the two of you were identical, happy, even joyous souls. 5. The universe believed in gravity as well as several other forces of consequence, while Time's Arrow was a popular game played between bodies and worlds. But secrets were forbidden. Every idea, notion, ugly past, and tiny truth was its own invincible particle bouncing inside a porous cage ready to make its escape. Sitting at the back of the galley, one forgetful human could gather up a respectable number of insights. The crew wasn't allowed to discuss the present mission. As being loyal souls, they obeyed every order. But no topic was half as important as this. That's what Kingfisher read in the impatient faces, impatient postures. Each careful voice revealed frustrations and perceived insults. High-ranking souls deserved to know why their good lives were at risk, which was why they often spoke about past missions, alluding to the terrible secrets that they were entrusted to carry. Secrets held close and safe, and then everyone fell silent, eye-seeking eyes, doubt and worry playing with a corrosive sense that this mission was going to bring their doom. One warrior seemed especially wounded, and that made it easy to coax the fellow to join Kingfisher inside a chamber dubbed the Observatory. Every surface was covered with squid skin. Images piped in from the outside world made the skimmer vanish, the two new friends finding themselves standing between fast-moving ice and the nearly starless, somewhat blue-shifted sky. The harum-scarum roared about his adventures and professional triumphs, every boast ending with the same declaration: "I love my darling city." Then one day, dragging a hand over his only mouth, Kingfisher muttered, "The city you'll never see again." "Of course I'm coming home, why wouldn't I?" "Because your darling is a wandering dot, and she doesn't care about you. That new master is sure to find reasons, good or not, to charge off in a fresh direction." "But my city's slow," he replied. "We'll catch up soon." When he wished, the resident Halcyon could produce a grim, worn-down smile. "I don't mean to worry anyone," Kingfisher lied, "but we're riding the naked bow of a ship that's plunging through an unmapped wilderness, a void littered with failed galaxies and sunless worlds. The sky is our enemy, the most likely hazard being some black iceberg that doesn't give a shit about me and probably isn't especially fond of you either. This I know too well. That's my story. I once knew where I was and where I was going, but then the sky tried to kill me, and the next trillion days were spent wandering the ice. Never sure where I was, no landmark worth a gram of trust." "That sounds like a magnificent story," his companion said. "On places, yes, but most days were exceptionally boring," Kingfisher offered a human shrug. "No, let's talk about your leader, this little ship's master." His companion's body said quite a lot. Scales lifted, spines lifted, but both mouths remained closed and silent. "The lady has us following a line, implying that she has a clear, hard destination in mind." "That is a classified matter," the warrior replied. "Yet she mentioned to me where we're going." "She would not." "Everywhere," Kingfisher quoted. "What does that mean?" "I don't know, but it's what she offered. With her hand on my shoulder, she said, 'Everywhere. That's where we're headed.'" Spines lifted higher. "I don't care what that means," he said with a professional passion, but the poor fellow was standing beside a bird who didn't want calm seas. "We've already covered a fair distance," Kingfisher allowed. "And remember, I've had experience with this manner of travel. It's not a guess when I tell you that we're a full light second removed from your old triumphs, from your loved ones and all your cherished enemies. And yes, the skimmer was a fine ship when it was new, but nothing in this world is new. We're sliding faster and leaping higher than any old beast should travel. Every manner of catastrophe clings to us, waiting for its chance, and believe me, I know what happens when we crash into this goddamn ice. A day gets lost or 10,000 years, and when you manage to pick up that powerful body and its heroic brain, you'll learn that the lady on the bridge has abandoned you, leading me to the question, who else knows where we're going? The harum-scarum contemplated a noble retreat. That's what Kingfisher saw in the tilt of the spines and heard from the whispers leaking from both mouths. But no, in the end, he surrendered what Kingfisher had already assumed. The pilot knows where to put us, he said, and the pilot will fly us straight home again. The emerald skimmer was swift and durable. Indeed, Kingfisher had never seen a hand as skilled as this AI pilot was. Snowstorms and wind-tossed waters never totally halted its progress. Mountainous icebergs were conquered in 2 leaps, the first reaching the summit, and after a watchful pause, it would glide down to the plains beyond. When there were long reaches of clear skies, the vessel sprouted wings, flying close enough to the lowest demon ceiling. The human scalp felt the crackling of shaped energies. Standing alone inside the observatory, the hard, dirty, deep ice spreading out on all sides, Kingfisher kept watch for any novelty worth his attention, and then he called out. "That's a fence o' wishes," he said. An old fellow, judging by his crooked lines. No response. 20 days later. "Hey, pilot, there's a city of sails and skates. 1,000,000 citizens letting the wind push them toward open water." Silence. 10 days after that, the ice cap was ripped apart by a warm upwelling. "See the bright bubbles? Each bubble is its own ark, my friend. 1,000 self-sufficient vessels carrying the best of 1,000 worlds. Can you imagine what they're telling each other now?" Again, silence. 80 more, busy but quiet days. Then he called out, "Pilot, have you ever watched a war? Those flashes to the starboard. That's where 2 nests of eagers are fighting over a salt seam." "I don't know the eagers." The voice was soft and a little bit sweet. "Nobody knows the eagers," Kingfisher continued. "Cold machines from between the galaxies." This cold machine probably modeled 1,000,000 conversations, just like anyone trapped in a cocktail party. "You have some experience with this terrain?" the pilot allowed. "More than some," he said, "which gives me a clear sense about where we're going." His voice sounded certain and a little proud. "You know nothing," he was informed. One human arm was aimed with precision, but the general course was public knowledge. What Kingfisher offered was a specific distance rendered in the most ancient units, kilometers. "You're wrong," the pilot insisted. "Yet I'm uncomfortably close to being right, I think." Silence. "Your commander needs to be quick," Kingfisher continued, "but she very much wants to survive the journey too, a journey dependent on this craft and nothing else, which is why, with this average velocity in these general conditions, I'm convinced that we're halfway to our goal." More models were spun up. "I gave you nothing," the pilot insisted. Triggering laughter. "Oh, darling, you go ahead and tell yourself that." The disciplined crew might have mentioned certain concerns, or perhaps the pilot did, unless the skimmer's master was only being a gracious soul, inviting her halcyon into her sanctuary. The bridge smelled of unwashed flesh. A copper platter and half-eaten meal were set on the floor. Neither sandal was needed anymore. Standing before the diamond windows, the giant woman was staring beyond the endless ice, watching the faint line where the ice joined the sky. "I like you." That's how she began the meeting. "Which is exactly what you hoped to hear," she continued. "Everyone enjoys our dear Kingfisher. He's pleasant and patient, and he's rumored to be delightfully simple. Except that broken mind still has its gifts, and my brain, a somewhat better brain, wonders if your ignorance is an illusion. You pretend to have amnesia, but you actually do recall your beginnings. The damaged bioceramics are a convenient excuse to keep your nature hidden." "That's an appealing notion," Kingfisher said. "Are my secrets too embarrassing to share or too terrible?" "Neither. With a creature like you, every moment is wonderful and amazing, and your importance is too large to be embraced by rational souls." "I don't know any rational souls," he said. She didn't intend to laugh, but the chuckle slipped out of her. Then she continued. "Imagine yourself in command of a vessel," she said, "and a critical mission suddenly falls to you. You know what needs to be done. No doubts whatsoever. Straight away you assemble the finest possible crew, plus supplies and fuel. Then you set off into the wilderness. But your exceptional crew never learns what your mission is. This is a topic where you tell them nothing. Or maybe you offer a few cryptic words in passing and 1,000 wrong explanations are born. The point is you dress your proud ship with ignorance and myth, leading to the question, why hide the truth from the good women and men who live beside you?" Several respectable answers were considered, but something else became obvious. "You're not talking about the skimmer," he said. "Not at all," she said. "Our galaxy ship," he said. "Certain myths claim this quasar drive machine was equipped for a 1,000,000,000-year voyage and then sent after something important. Something we had lost, perhaps. Or a treasure stolen from its rightful owners. Well, stolen from you." She glanced at his profile. Nothing more. "A 1,000,000,000-year voyage," he repeated. "But your target slipped away. That's the story that gets told most. Believed best. Made real. Meanwhile, the universe expands around us, while we push deeper into a bubble of near vacuum. And maybe the creation is ridiculously weak. I hear that opinion often enough. Quite a few souls, including some of my dearest friends, pray to fate and mischief and time, pleading for this day to be the very last." Again, the master stared at what wasn't a genuine horizon. The bow was too large and perfectly flat, tens of millions of kilometers of ice, dissolving into the illusion of a hard line. "You were here," Kingfisher said, "at the beginning. And I'm rather convinced that you were too," she said. "I just can't find you in my head or the official records." "Sometimes," he said. She waited. He began to cry. "I do remember," he whispered. "Tell me." "Except there's no memory, not in any trustworthy sense." Kingfisher twirled a finger before the tearful eyes. "A recollection of memory, standing on top of more memories and recollections. That's all I have. One day that's too important to leave behind, which is why I practiced it, replaying key moments 1,000,000,000 times and then scattering my work across the sand pile of a brain. That's what finds me, usually in my dreams." The woman's skeleton straightened, making her taller than ever. "I see hands and a pretty face." Kingfisher reached for what wasn't even a memory. "And a starship as old as the universe." "I know that starship," she said. A long moment was crossed in reflection and anguish. Then he said, "Madam, may I be excused now?" The Halcyon brought home the platter and its half-eaten meal. Quirk was playing with the map as he entered. Setting it aside, she conjured a chair on her side of the table, and he set the platter between them, saying nothing, watching his roommate strip the boiled meat off the faux bones. Then she grew massive teeth, consuming the bones with a few hard crunches. Quirk hadn't left their quarters since the voyage began. Not to remain hidden, the crew and her ex-master were fully aware of her presence. No, the creature without rank or status was wise to keep to herself. She quit eating before she was full. Once more, the teeth changed, the mouth and face changed. He pushed the platter toward her. "I had my fill in the galley." "Is that where this came from?" "No, I visited the bridge afterward." Her eyes grew smaller, harder. "Oh, and by the way," Kingfisher said, "this little galaxy ship of ours, I think I finally found what it's been looking for." "Which is what?" "Don't be jealous," he said. Closing his eyes, he said, "My first love. I think she is." 6. Despite being human, he was lovely. That was your opinion, and there was never any reason to keep that a secret. Yet you never told anyone, particularly him. Each species has its logic when it came to youth, and by human standards your companion's face was mature, but not very mature, like a man with one foot still in his childhood. Delicate features were endowed with the barest hint of asymmetry, an unlikely quantity to notice, except you weren't just any panware. You were an unusually talented member of your sprawling, secretive tribe. Form meant everything to you, bone and cartilage and the details embedded inside trillions of immortal cells. That's why the small human nose was fascinating. And the expressive wide mouth with thin lips and an ancestral number of white but not perfectly white human teeth. And the busy bright eyes that were dark brown and with hints of green at the same moment, except sometimes one eye turned a little bit blue, or gold or purple, a random transformation. And if you mentioned it to him, he laughed and said, "Thank you for noticing," and the new color vanished by day's end. But if nobody mentioned the change, and if no reflection ever looked back at him, the invading shade was still gone by day's end. In other words, that face contained a subtle mechanism, reflex, or affliction that always coaxed him back to being the same boyish lad that you would never forget. Every 1,000 days, you conjured a fresh face and form, then traveled to some secure room where one or several panwares wore their own temporary natures. This was standard protocol among your kind, a duty fulfilled long before you were born on the street. Panwares met panwares to share whatever was important. The effectiveness of the local government and the moods of the general population. Those were official topics, but most conversations dwelled on your own moods and spirits. The first job of this ritual was to remind you that there was a sprawling community thriving around you, even if you wished you were alone or forgotten. Then your circumstances changed, and only one topic mattered. And how is our kingfisher today? Every panware asked some version of that obvious question. Anecdotes and general observations, that's what you gave them. Then, with a hopefulness that never bore fruit, you asked, "But do we know who he was? Back in the beginning, I mean." "We know nothing." That was a standard chorus. "We keep hoping you'll provide us with answers." Panwares didn't evolve from any one species or lineage. The first shapeshifters came from multiple worlds, and those worlds died before the first human ran, before the first harem-scarum stood her ground. This was what you had been told, and told, and told, yet even though you could flow into any form, every panware remained the same as they always were. Certain individuals were charming, others had no use for games played with kind gestures and small humors. Each of you had a favorite size and preferred odor, and it didn't matter what form the others took for the day. After living in the city forever, you always knew which nameless entity was sitting before you inside the private room. "Others are losing patience," the panware said. This happened to be the entity who encouraged you to study Kingfisher, a fellow you never liked or admired, by the way. You were wearing a harem-scarum body. He was, too. "This broken creature isn't worth your time," he warned. "I disagree," you said. "With me you can disagree, but others are ready to pull you aside." Different reactions were weighed. You chose boldness. "Agreed. You win." His spines lifted, signaling surprise. "I won't go home today," you continued. "You go instead. Take my place." He said nothing. And you laughed at him. "Your name is Quirk, and you've lived beside the human for a very long time. Oh, and by the way, details don't escape the broken boy, so you'll have to find compelling excuses for not remembering his tastes and tolerances, particularly with sex, which will be frequent. And if you don't enjoy the conjugal moments, the human will know. Make no mistake about that." "This won't happen," he replied. He said, "An accident is going to find you. The two of you will be strolling down an avenue when a plasmatic torch fails, and he'll survive the blast. But when he wakes, kind voices will claim that your brain died. And years later, once his grief fades just enough, I'll introduce myself to the horny fellow." "He's that important, is he?" "As I said, we don't know what he is, but we've reached the line where More aggressive means are called for. No, you told him. No to what? All of it. Harum-scarum emotions recruited their entire bodies, but this Panware was never convincing when it came to shows of pleasure or courage. He attempted a mocking smile. You drove an elbow spine through his neck, and before he recovered from his surprise and the embarrassment, you grew blades, removing the head and mind from the amorphous body. Then, with as much joy as you had ever felt, you carried his soul to a public dumpster where it would rest long enough for you to reach your next destination. 7. Then came a long strip of days where Kingfisher refused to leave his quarters. One by one, the crew delivered gifts from the galley, paying their respects while checking on his well-being. I'm just bored of the ice, he lied. His warrior friend assured him that there was nothing to see. The storms had become unrelenting, 10 meters of snow falling every hour, which is why the skimmer was presently making slow progress. But once the skies emptied out, the two of them would stand against inside the observatory, resuming their conversation from where it left off. Well, maybe we will, Kingfisher said, and thanking him for a bowl of meats inspired by a dozen worlds, he closed and secured the door. His roommate was a human figure sitting cross-legged on the bed. He set the bowl on the tabletop, eating nothing until she joined him. One of them was crying. The other asked, Why? I was wrong, he said. I shouldn't have forced you to wear any name. I've grown quite accustomed to Quirk, she said. And you certainly had reasons. All of the things you did for me and everything that you didn't explain. She said nothing, waiting for the tears to quit. Then the two of them ate until the bowl was empty, after which they played a game of flesh and song that both of them genuinely loved. Kingfisher was dreaming when the pilot called to him, except the name wasn't his name, and he sat up while waking up. His roommate was a bright golden crab standing in the corner, pincers busily refolding the map. The pilot said, Kingfisher? Yes. I saw something that might interest you. Oh, wonderful. His roommate set the map aside and flowed into a human form. Show me, the human said. One wall changed its nature, wood replaced with images of fresh drifts and driving snow. Blue bolts of lightning briefly illuminated that brutal landscape. What resembled a long wing or fin stood tall in the distance. I don't recognize this, he confessed. It's one portion of the mechanical entity, the pilot explained. A 20-kilometer-long beast that called itself the glory of existence. Kingfisher contemplated the name, and when nothing felt familiar, he linked a nexus with onboard repositories. Built by lesser machines, the well-named Glory originated in the Virgo cluster, and, swimming on the bow, it thrived on a diet of aneutronic fusion and impossible ideas. Only one of its kind had ever existed, and it hadn't been seen in 100 million years. Maybe Glory was dead all the while, unless life was still lurking inside the vast body, but either the ice had it trapped or those bleak and lovely ideas had rendered it helpless. Thank you for showing me. Thank you for introducing me to the Eagers. When the pilot was gone, for no reason at all, his roommate began to weep. Kingfisher sat on the floor behind her, holding her, thinking of everything that he wasn't going to say. The storm finally dissolved into clear open air, and once again the skimmer grew wings and unleashed its plasmatic jets. Kingfisher felt his body accelerating and then soaring, but he stubbornly remained inside his little cabin. 9 days later, a visitor announced her arrival by striking the sealed door with both fists. Kingfisher was sitting on the floor, fiddling with the map. His roommate studied his reactions. He didn't look up, and nothing about his face changed. She was the one who manually unlocked the door, and the ship's master stepped inside before thinking to ask. May I? He said, please, and sat at the table. His guest conjured a wide chair, and after adjusting her golden belts, she sat across from him, setting the panware and studying him before her eyes settled on the big hands, laid palms up on the tabletop. Humanity, she said. I'll tell you my version of our story, if you wish. Please do. His roommate sat on the bed. Humanity was weak and rare, their guest began. But a dance of circumstances blessed us. Mysterious entities gave us the stars, and one grand accident put an extraordinary gift in our hands. And it can be argued that our importance to the universe has only grown since those times. Is that so? She nodded. This vast machine that we're riding, it began as a human inspiration and very much a human passion. Nobody else could have achieved this. Out of millions of species, we had colonies in the most useful places. We wielded youth and unearned confidence, a fresh empire and endless workshop full of odd technologies. 1,000 most prominent species helped with our work, and so did the Panwares, who went by a different name then. His roommate clicked her tongue, then said, "Each." The master sighed, closed the hands and opened them again. I belonged to that aeon-long effort. I was on site while Terran masses of high-grade hyperfiber were injected into the funnel-shaped mold. Then a billion oceans were poured into that vast mouth. My private worries and public pride are still vivid in the center of my mind, such a golden age. The Milky Way was united, old wars and grudges set aside, and my voice was among the loudest. Don't doubt me on that, little boy. I helped run the construction of this machine, and then we docked it beside 2 suns, one of them an angry white dwarf. With our signal, the dwarf exploded, and our ship's engine ignited, and 1,000 million years were crossed, which is exactly what this temple of magnificence and ego was designed to do. But 1,000 million years were only the beginning, and this ship's rulers, me, and a very few others, always understood what might come to pass. The ship of ignorance and myth, said Kingfisher, earning a nod and a grin from the master. When chasing an object of boundless worth, she said, it's best to leave your subordinates more inspired than informed. The great ship had been absent for more than 1 million years. That's why it wasn't a common topic among the intentionally youthful crew. Our declared mission was one of discovery and intimidation. Our neighbors in the Virgo cluster deserve to see what the mighty Milky Way could accomplish. That's why we rode the supernova into the void. Every galaxy and star cluster heard the same mighty boast, a vast, loud, exuberant lie. Because if the other empires learned about our real purpose, each would have built its own galaxy ship, and now we'd have an armada in our wake. Who steers the intimidating ship? AI pilots, 13 superconductive organisms woven into the ship's long rim, self-repairing, self-regulating gods in love with one another and devoted to the long pursuit. You speak with them? Almost never. How do you know they're still at their stations? Oh, I've suffered some doubts, yes, which is why I've been aiming my city for the rim. The only way to be certain, one way or the other, is to stand beside the old housings, demanding an audience. The master took one breath and held it, then pulled a second breath in on top of the first and smiled. Not that many days ago, a sealed nexus channel was wrenched wide, and in a chorus, the pilots warned me in every other city that an odd contraption had suddenly appeared. What looked like a starship was directly in front of our ship. A cold, dark sphere clad in a carbon skin. 50 kilometers wide and on a collision course. The pilots couldn't explain how it went unnoticed or where it might have come from. There were no signatures or EM emissions, and no pilot responded to any hails. My ship's defense systems did their best, but the black carbon skin hid a hull made from an exceptional grade of hyperfiber. The lasers barely warmed the target. Quite a drama for an old lady watching from her city's bridge. The first cannonball in a long bombardment. That's what I was seeing. But then the cannonball unleashed multiple engines, birth of the universe temperatures, spitting out tight blooms that broke its fall. Demon ceilings were split. Pack ice and ocean turned to vapor and storms. That's when I lost sight of the mysterious starship, and I abandoned my city 17 hours later. I don't know what I hope to find when we reach the landing site, but that's where I want to be. She fell, silent. A man who could chase the wrong woman for 1,000,000,000 days was ready to wait for a very long while. His roommate was rather less patient. "Is there anything else you need to tell us, madam?" "Oh, just that it's amazing to me," said the master, closing her hands and rising to her feet again, making ready to leave. "A girl born beneath the twin suns of Malachite accomplishes so much. She builds this fabulous ship, flies past galaxies and grand civilizations. Billions of busy years are lived and enjoyed. Yet the girl still remembers standing on a gray beach, staring at her twin shadows while cold bare toes wriggle in the chill mud. And all of her existence, that's the only moment when her soul feels brighter and grander than all of the stars." 3 more days of hard flying ended with the engines abruptly cutting out. They were now riding inside a glider, and that's when the shrill, insistent peal of an alarm began. Kingfisher looked at his roommate's eyes, huge dark discs that he found lovely, and he meant to tell her that. But she spoke first. "Quirk is a fine name. Say it to me, please." "Quirk?" "Look," Quirk told him, unfolding the map until the entire city covered one end of their room. Then with a finger and a thumb, she reached for a district that he had never visited. The map reacted by narrowing its focus, bringing up a sub-district that meant nothing to him, and burrowing deeper still, a neighborhood marked with warning signs. Some variety of civil unrest was underway, at least in those long-ago times when this map was drawn, and reaching deep inside the red terrain, she pulled up the intersection of 2 avenues. Avenues named Kingfisher and Quirk. Kingfisher needed to see what was waiting there, but Quirk caught his fingers first, and when he tried again, she turned into muscle and pincers, a sweet begging voice, saying, "Not yet. Please. No." 8. He would return home from his travels, 1 or several days jammed with novel chatter. Then he would quickly fall asleep. Humans were enthusiastic sleepers, but this creature was among the finest ever. Hours passed with him dead on his bed or her bed, slow breathing, quick breathing, dreams that made the closed eyes shiver. Sometimes there was a sigh and sometimes words. In a city of immortals, languages evolved at minuscule rate. But once or twice every year, the poor fellow broke into a dialect that hadn't been heard for a very long while. You recorded every muttering, then buried them deep. Nobody else was allowed to hear his nonsense, including him. He wanted you sleeping beside him, but you weren't much for slumber, and it was easy enough to leave him sometimes for many hours. The man was fully aware of your nature. "Where did you go last night?" he might ask. Maybe you offered the truth, maybe you fell short, but the usual response was to surrender pieces of truth, and he bridged the gaps with happy lines, which was very much what you did with Kingfisher's biography. Pieces of pure fact, strung together with imagination and hope. 3 Vazens lived in the city, ancient creatures who adored history and their status as unimpeachable authorities. They could be sources of rare information. But the first 2 Vazens were disappointments. The creatures still had their famously perfect memories, but that was what ruined them. Refugees from 1,000 galaxies filled the city, each citizen bringing its own intricate history, and these natural historians couldn't stop learning about civilizations and phenomenal wars, dates on alien calendars, and milestones in their own relentless studies. They knew too much about everything, but the one galaxy that you wanted to learn about, and should you walk away, even for the best reasons, they threatened to never speak to you again. Not a burden for students who couldn't look like anyone, but still this was quite a lot of effort to stand quietly and learn nothing. The 3rd Vazen proved more helpful, eventually. A solitary creature living in a deep, half-lit basement, nibbling at the resident molds. She explained how these dull surroundings protected her from the distractions that had ruined her brothers. Likewise, she had murdered her interests in every lesser species that once inhabited her home galaxy. Panwares. They were the only topic worth her mighty genius. The universe had one reliable, independent voice when it came to the Panware's origins and long reign, and that was her voice. "Are you a Panware?" the Vozen asked. "Oh, no," you said. "Because I can't be fooled. A wise soul like you, I'm not surprised." Panwares once ruled the home galaxy. That was the scholar's opinion, which neatly aligned with many other accounts, but unlike everyone else, the Vozen had spent her existence yanking the useful and honest from all the ridiculous noise, and once she started lecturing, she couldn't stop. "The Union. That's what the first Panwares built," she declared. Which was correct. The Union was an alliance born from a few thousand individuals from a wide range of species. Their goals included studying the universe while guiding the development of worlds and young civilizations, or in many cases, killing worlds and crushing every bright mind that didn't serve their needs. Intricate accounts of crimes perpetrated against the living. That was the kernel in every story. The Vozen claimed not to love or hate the Union. She was too much of a scholar to let emotion play any role. Except she despised your kind. She couldn't hear the anger and scorn, but you did, and there was pleasure in each word as she recounted how the Union was overthrown. A derelict starship drifted out of the emptiest sky. That's how the collapse began. The ship was as large as a world and perhaps as old as a universe. Unlikely events put the young humans at the helm. Then later, when the derelict was made more secure, the Union stepped on the board, and that's when the universe sprang its trap. Oh, the girl had such fun telling that story. Some details were true, others utterly wrong, with guesses and hope masquerading as blunt, inescapable fact. The 10-day lecture ended when you retreated. "If you leave now, I'm done with you," she threatened. "Agreed," you said. 10,000 days later, that's when you returned as a different species, sporting a fresh voice. The conversation replayed exactly as it did the first time. You were no Panware, and she was too smart to be fooled, and standing patiently on 4 new legs, you listened to a thorough description of the Union and the great ship. But this version was significantly different, an entire planet hiding in the ship's cargo hull. Really? Yes, there was, she insisted. "Tell me the rest," you said. Everything was different now. Most of the Union came on board the great ship, and then the secret world, the Marrow, trapped them and carried them away, and it was the galaxy's left-behind Panwares who helped build the galaxy ship. The Vozen was visited many times. Obviously, the crystalline mind was infected with conspiracies and insanities, but every account ended with the foolish Union destroyed, and maybe because of a turncoat or two among the ranks. Who was the turncoat? A question worth asking, and the scholar never gave the same answer twice. Then you quit visiting the dark basement. The chore had served its purpose, and what's more, you and the human were usually wandering together. No time left to stand beside the 5-billion-year-old beast who didn't know what was real. Then there was a day when the two of you visited a zone not 5 kilometers from the hidden boson. It was Kingfisher's choice to rent quarters for the next several nights, and after swimming in the local river, he consumed 2 feasts and an odd drug that dropped him even deeper into sleep than usual. You walked outdoors as the streets turned down their lights. What appearance to wear! On a whim, nothing more than that, you did what you had done only a few times before. You duplicated Kingfisher's face and body, his walk and voice, the perpetual smile. Then you returned to the basement to give greetings to your mad friend. "Hello, you," he began. The bright black eyes stared at the face. What was a very long pause had to be crossed together. Then the old Vozen reached out for you, offering a name swaddled in warm pleasure. Every 1,000 days or so, you met with your official overseer, ripping the head from another Panware, then leaving its soul in a public dump that had been an ugly moment. The master's chief of staff didn't approve of such methods, but you did her the honor of coming to her next, which she appreciated, and offering respectable goals. You begged for her protection from the other Panwares. That is the only reason Kingfisher still belonged to you. He dreams about his lost life, you mentioned. And do these dreams help us? Sometimes, was a perfectly reasonable answer. Then you fed her a string of clues to prove your expertness, deftly avoiding useful revelations. Then there were other days you weren't just a spy sleeping with an assignment, no. You were a scholar who visited odd places and spoke to everyone. The giant woman that Kingfisher remembers? I've met travelers at the docks who recognize my roommate's description. She sounds like a foul-tempered human who's presently at the helm of her own distinct city. Perhaps you know her. Your superior pretended to think. Then, with her most believable voice, she said, "No, I don't know her." "Or maybe your superior is." "And maybe I'll ask," she said. "Because I have to wonder. The only master I know is ours. But others do exist. Is there any possibility, no matter how ridiculously remote, that Kingfisher's lady once served as the master to the great ship?" There. That earned a long stare. Because maybe this wasn't an accident. The legendary master keeps my Kingfisher as a pet. If the boy is as old as he seems to be, then maybe the two of them are tied together in some critical way. You were convincing, or so she believed, none of this. Either way, the chief of staff soon built a team with a single mission: search the oldest, most durable records for this mysterious fellow. Nothing was found. Or rather, you had already uncovered what was available, copying data and destroying files as you worked your way through the archives. "Kingfisher could be important," your superior kept saying, not speaking to you. Convincing herself was what mattered. Somehow he might hold clues to the great ship. She was wrong, of course. Your roommate was a mangled image of someone long dead. Besides, nobody would ever find the great ship. There was one future, and that was billions of years spent chasing more darkness. Yet you liked the mangled image enough to protect him, and you loved him enough to dream about him when you did sleep. And if you had the time, you might make yourself look and sound like your unimportant lover. Then you would sit in a public space, some park, cafe, or playground in a neighborhood famous for its ancient citizens, and always smile. You would eat an adventurous meal. Sometimes that face was remembered and an old friend would come close. And there were occasions, the blessed, rarest, most luminous days, when the friend recalled a man from long before, calling out to you with a happy voice. "Perry, hello," they said. "Hello, Perry." 9. "Not yet. Please. No." Kingfisher pulled back his hand and Quirk began closing the map. The alarm continued and the engines remained dead, but someone was working on the fix. Auxiliary power was recruited, the lights dimming until the room was black, and then a muffled blast rose from the stern. Lasers and fuel had given birth to a sun, but it was an anemic, exceptionally temporary sun, and now even the cabin lights were finished. "It's impressive, these overlapping failures," Kingfisher mentioned. "A system-wide infection, probably." Quirk changed her skin, cool light pouring from her face and hands. Together they folded the map until it was a hard black brick. Kingfisher called out, "Pilot?" No reply. With bright hands, Quirk opened the door. A crew member hurried past, heading for the bridge. Then he pocketed the map, and with one face bright as a beacon, they ran, the hallway air filled with scents of clipper ships sailing across alien seas. There were neighborhoods that prohibited entry, and certain districts were infested with crime and insurgencies. That's what pragmatic cap cars told the silly traveler. But there were days when he felt especially brave, or maybe his curiosity refused to surrender. "Okay, deliver me here," he insisted, pointing to an adjacent intersection. Some cap cars refused that simple workaround, but when they agreed, the only barrier left was a long walk to places that were a little forbidden. Being robbed by strangers was delicious fun. At least, that was Kingfisher's experience. Urgency made time slow down. Tiny questions about the assailants' lives, little confessions about his own state of existence. That's how we learned about despair, greed, boredom, all fine reasons to threaten an old human. Then the interaction would end with one party surrendering just enough wealth for the other to declare victory, and now he knew a little more about this half-lawless avenue. Every closed-off neighborhood was its own puzzle. Stubborn faiths liked to monopolize the local buildings, and the usual response was for the locals to remain out of sight and say nothing. But there were days when one disciple, or 1,000, were sent to confront the visitor. Kingfisher had to learn that he was unwelcome, that he was doomed. By and large, humans didn't deserve the best gods or the holy void. Or maybe these souls worshipped the dark matter universe that swam through them, feeding their worthy spirits. While he was this miserable fellow who knew nothing but lies. And was the lost man strong enough to admit his failures? Always, yes. With that, he handed over a robber's wages, making both parties happy. War zones were the most exciting, but this was the city of reasonable restrictions, kinetic weapons and ornamental swords serving as the official tools of combat. One famous war had been burning for aeons. A pair of species from the same lost galaxy never quit fighting over a ceremonial ball of iridium and hyperfiber. Kingfisher wanted to see that precious ball, but something much worse was planned for that day. Ignorant as a bug, he was strolling between the battle lines when a bunker hatch flew open. Ugly wet sounds broke the calm, and the soldiers appeared. Coming out of the bunker in pieces, limbs flying, torsos flying, what passed for heads spat out hard and rolled up to his feet. Then, at last, the shattered pieces of a plasma torch with its safeties stripped, the killing weapon, and peering into the gloom, Kingfisher caught sight of something lovely. A creature not found in any database, yet familiar to him nonetheless. "I slept with you once," he muttered. Quirk vanished. Hurrying out of the district, Kingfisher hailed a car and flew straight home, arriving before his roommate, as it happened. A rare moment indeed, and then she came through the door looking nothing but human. He didn't ask about her day. She didn't inquire about his distractions, proving just how lucky he was, and for all kinds of good reasons, he refused to follow this subject to its obvious ends. The glider's bridge was jammed with dead control panels and the entire crew. Every crash chair had been deployed, only the master was standing, big naked feet set apart. She was staring through the diamond canopy. Quirk and Kingfisher walked up beside her. They deserved an offhand glance before she returned to her vigil. The emerald glider was still high enough that the ice looked smooth and simple, but in the near distance that ice came to an abrupt end. Black water reached beyond the false horizon. Somewhere out there was an alien starship. The ship was floating, or it had sunk deep, and either way, Kingfisher wanted to see it for himself. The glider soon passed over the shoreline. There were 3 empty chairs, heavily padded, collection vessels ready to save the liquefied remains of each brave explorer, if there was a hard crash. Except the glider was reshaping his wings, slowing them down while drawing out their descent, an interesting state of affairs since the pilot was obviously absent. The water began to glow, thousands of arcs floating on or just under the surface. Orbs and needles and crystal snowflakes had gathered together, and they happened to be very close to where the glider was going to set down. "We need to bear to the right," the halcyon said. Because of him, or out of coincidence, the wings tilted, the glider making a graceful adjustment. Everyone laughed. Hard. Then, with a commanding voice, he said, "Reignite our engines." But the silent descent continued. Quirk and the master stayed on their feet. Then Kingfisher's warrior friend stood beside him as the emerald boat gracefully slid into the water. Which wasn't only water, it seemed. The bow struck something dark and hard, throwing the 4 of them off their feet. An embarrassment for any harem-scarum. Then the chairs were gone, everyone was standing, and the ceiling lights came alive again. The control panels, engines, and sensors remained dead. "But I'm here," the pilot announced, thrilled to recover its voice. "You don't need to worry about me anymore." 10. This is my home. I've never left the city, not even with my imagination. The words felt genuine when you used them, but you weren't even halfway honest. After all, the city was crowded with species from the farthest realms, and to mimic any organism, you had to consider the worlds that made them, the skies that educated them. A Panware's ultimate success came from believing in her new body, and you were as gifted as any with those tricks. Yet here you were, standing in the cold, raw, open air, balanced on the back of a crippled vessel, standing beneath a sky that was very close to empty. The surrounding waters were beginning to freeze, and if the engines couldn't be convinced to work, there would be only one way home again, on foot, at least for the first steps and maybe the quadrillion strides that came next. I need to be home, you confessed. Kingfisher offered a distracted nod, his brown and green eyes studying the water. A single small light had appeared in the distance, and after winking out of existence twice, it was slowly growing brighter. Which might mean something, though it most likely didn't. 9 days of aimless drifting had delivered arcs that asked questions, and other arcs that called you fools for living in the open. Swimming animals and machines came close enough for Kingfisher to recognize their nature, or he didn't know them at all. But no visitor lingered, much less offered to help, and that little light hadn't made you any promises. A quiet sigh broke free, and Kingfisher looked at you, at your human face. You want to go below, he guessed. With you. Well, for a little while, he said. You held his hand, letting go only when his hand was needed to open the cabin door. You sat on the bed, and he stood before, watching you. Then he finally sat with you. Why this was the perfect moment, well, that was the universe's great mystery, wasn't it? With a swift hand, you reached inside his pocket and withdrew the map. Practice motions took you straight to the confluence of Quirk and Kingfisher. Open this up, and you'll find everything. Your original name, parts of your story, testimonies from entities and AIs too old and depleted to recall the names of lost spouses. But they remember the boyish human who entertained them for a few moments. Kingfisher looked at the map, but only for a moment. Then he turned to you, folding it up tight again. Thank you. Embarrassment, bafflement, maybe a little sorrow. That's what his complicated expression showed you. I know. I should have shared what I found. Everything. Honest words from a lying beast. But another voice intruded. Halcyon, the pilot called out. You're needed above. Kingfisher slipped the map and his lost history into his pocket. A menace took hold of one of them, but the other laughed at her silly mood, and standing, he bent at the waist, kissing the tip of a nose that would be gone tomorrow. The small light was fixed to a small vessel. 3 hulls and a platform made from hyperfiber had pushed their way through the slushy new ice, nuzzling up to the skimmer. A crew of 6 entities was ready to jump on board. One was an AI wearing a metal and glass body meant to resemble a male human, a human dressed in an icy white toga. Strange in his own right, but the other 5 creatures were far more peculiar. Each was a life suit with some kind of human-shaped beast inside. Nothing was visible but the faces, and no 2 faces alike. Every eye had its own design. Mouths were endowed with their own architecture. The flesh came in 10 colors or with no color at all, and there was a beauty thriving here that deserved your fascination and a much, much closer examination. With a brass mouth and a talent for the local languages, the AI said, Hello, and please line up, please. Feeling her status challenged, the master came forward first. Who are you? The AI demanded. An ancient name was offered and a rank, with more information on the way, but one of the life suit creatures put a gloved hand across her face. Then a sibling grabbed the back of her head. Those gloves were far more than just gloves. Scanning tools dug through bone into the bioceramic mind. If this technology existed in the city, it was a secret kept from you. That's what you were thinking when the 2 hands were released, and the AI clattered in a certain way, giggling with joy, apparently. We don't know you, the machine declared. With a wave of a brass hand, he asked, Who is next? Which was when you realized at last that Kingfisher was no longer standing beside you. "11. One fine moment was spent watching tiny bubbles break and vanish, and then the water became perfectly calm again. He wanted to be just as calm, but a busy effervescence was infecting his blood, and his bloodless sand pile of a brain was full of sparks and nonsensical screams. A most remarkable terror was taking hold. The only worthy response was to laugh at himself, hard and loud, and looking down the length of the fuselage. He realized that everyone was staring at him, and every face seemed familiar, including the 5 faces studying him with those mismatched eyes. With an uncharacteristic shyness, Quirk came to him, whispering, "You should be next." A verdict that he accepted with a nod and a deep breath. "Who are you?" the AI asked. "Kingfisher, Halcyon." Neither seemed honest. Glancing at Quirk, he admitted, "I'm less than sure." She offered a sound that might be a name. "Perry," she began, with a few elaborate sounds tacked on to the first bit of nonsense. He wanted to hear something familiar, which was what happened, except his expectation might have steered him into this mistake. One life suit put a hand over his face. Another entity grabbed onto the back of his skull. Nobody else deserved as much study. 3 minutes of probing sounds and bursts of hard radiation mapped the remnants of a nearly useless mind, and some part of that rough treatment made him collapse. Or maybe he was just too tired to stand on his own power. Either way, the nameless man fell to his knees, another 20 minutes passing before he was passively conscious. The life suits and AI were gone, a 3-hulled boat carrying them through the gathering ice. Success. They found nothing of value here, and he was happy with the verdict and ready to resume his life. With a loud voice, the pilot declared, "My systems are recovering. Make ready to fly home starting soon." But not yet, no. The crew and master were still standing exposed on the hull, and in their entire lives they had never stared so hard at any human being. "They didn't take me," he muttered. Quirk put a hand through his hair, saying nothing. "Why not?" he asked. "Because they're just a scouting party. For you, darling. For you, a special flyer has been dispatched." "And the others?" "They don't know any of us. And since there's hard limits when it comes to mass and the distance to cover before they get home again..." "Wait," he interrupted. "What about you?" "I am no one," she replied. Once more, he stared at the calm water. Then a bit of light appeared in the distance, bright and swift, and maybe that was the promised flyer. "If I'm this important, they'll take you too," he said. "Take me where? And are you sure I'll be welcome?" He laughed at that. "Well then, I'll just have to protect you, the same as you've been looking after me." Quirk said nothing. He found his feet and his balance, and the strength to help her stand again. "I want you with me," he said. She stood as close as possible, whispering into an ear. "But you don't need me," she said. "Everything important is inside your map." Falling into his exceptional, clever trap. Then he was laughing again, loud and brazen, joyous and warm. "Oh, darling, I threw that map overboard. You weren't looking, and I dropped it into the sea, and now you're the only expert in the rich topic of me." Thank you for joining us for yet another podcast. We have a few more stories left for the month of December. I do hope you'll come back and listen, should you so choose. So, I hope you stay well, stay warm, stay hydrated, and I hope you'll come back and listen. And until then, my dear listener, I bid you a very fond and warm, and hopefully very temporary farewell.